Applied Magic by Dion Fortune. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Esoteric Glossary. Teaching on esoteric subjects contains so many vaguely defined terms that it is advisable that those studying in our group should know more precisely what we mean when we use certain of the key words. Indeed, in some of our earlier papers, the meaning is not always as clear as it might be, as some time elapsed, as usually happens, before the need for these definitions became evident. We do not legislate for other groups, but the definitions we give are in line with the principles behind our teaching and have now been shown by experience to be sound. It does not follow, however, that esoteric publications in general use the terms in exactly these meanings, and in fact the same word with slightly varying significances may sometimes be found in the same publication, making it necessary for the serious reader to be wary lest he gain a false impression. If needed, the authors knew exactly the impression they wished to give. The words we have in mind are set out below, and in some instances information on the subjects is added. The Logos is used as meaning the solar Logos, the god of our solar system, the god of the cosmos we describe as the first manifest. The manus are primarily ethnological leaders on the inner planes of the great root races. They depicted in themselves some great idea or principle which was behind the esoteric mission of their root race. There is more than one type of Manu. The Manu of a race is also the prototype or the ideal man of a race, and in this connection, the syllable man in certain languages can be of extreme antiquity and significance. The Manus are of the first three swarms, lords of flame, form, and mind, but not all of these lords are Manus. The Manus are indeed of archangel type, with a multiple ego. This is the nearest approximation in words to these great beings. Their personalized forms, however, appeared in humanized guise. The Masters are the perfected beings of the human evolution who guide mankind and perform certain other work rather than enter into their rest. They are of various types and grades. They do not become lords of humanity, see cosmic doctrine, until they have passed beyond all that is now known as humanity, even as no grade is established until the next is entered upon. The divine spark may be thought of as the outer aspect of the cosmic atom, stamped with the logoidal impress. Until a high grade is attained, it may be considered for all practical purposes as the cosmic atom, the immortal part of each one of us, rooted in the great unmanifest, of the same essence as the logoi, but vastly junior in development, etc. The individuality, or higher self, is the unit of an evolution consisting of the bodies of the highest three planes, using a seven-plane system, organized around the divine spark. The lower self, personality or projection, is the unit of an incarnation consisting of the bodies of the four lower planes in a seven-plane system. Its experiences are absorbed in essence after physical death by the higher self, but this alone does not determine the next projection, as the higher self has phases of development between incarnations, based largely on pre-incarnatory or evolutionary experiences which also influence the next projection. The soul is one of the words most frequently used with differing meanings. We use it as signifying the inner aspects of the personality, plus the outer aspects of the higher self. It is, in fact, the unit of evolution up to a certain point, beyond chest. The personality aspects of it are, or should be, absorbed in essence by the higher self at death, and the soul itself conditioned thereby for its next incarnation. This is capable of much wider exposition. It can be considered as the vehicle of evolving man, as far as the abyss on the tree of life, and its state at death and after has much to do with the next personality projected by the higher self. Certain pathologies of an esoteric nature affecting future incarnations are possible from wrong actions and attitudes of mind by it during incarnation and after death. Root races can be used for the original race from which spring the sub-races. It often refers to the 7 great divisions of the Atlantean race, and these racial prototypes were further developed in the post-diluvian world into the main racial families, as known exoterically. As a term, root race can also refer to the 4 color divisions of mankind and also to the 5 stages of human evolution on this globe, such as the Hyperborean, the Lemurian, the Atlantean, etc. The color divisions and stages of human evolution also had Manus, for there are many types of Manu. The white race contains not only the most evolved, the Aryan, but also the Semites who were intended to bring yet another ideal to the white race. Thus did the Manu Melchizedek prepare the way for Jesus the Christ, and thus did the idea of a Messiah become grafted onto the Semitic tradition. In the background of all this is a connection with the Holy Grail. Behind the secret history of Israel moves the archetypal priest of the Atlantean Semitic root race, and owing to certain Atlantean errors, the Jewish section of this race have brought this archetype to the West without themselves being fitted to use it, save for small groups. This is the curse of the Jews, and dates from long before the birth of Jesus, though they had accepted him much, would have been mitigated. Their theocracy should have grown into a world state, but they would not share with others. The manus of certain root races are known traditionally and some are enumerated. Rama was the Manu of the Aryan race. Melchizedek was the Manu of the Chaldean and early Semitic races, in addition to his Atlantean connection. Narada was the Manu of the first Atlantean race. Asuramaya was a Manu of an earlier Lemurian race, which had mingled with the early Atlanteans, and he lived in Atlantis in these earliest days. He was the teacher of the starry wisdom of the antediluvian world, as was Melchizedek to the post-diluvial, and was the first astronomer. In Atlantis, he worked with and under Narada. Euclid, who was a lord of one of the wisdom aspects of the Western tradition, see esoteric orders, was not only a great human teacher, but also had on the inner planes an aspect manifesting a direct beam from Asuramaya, somewhat analogous, but less in degree and origin, to the manifesting of the Christ by the Lord Jesus, which was more than an overshadowing. This subject is too complex for further reference here. The Semites were meant to be the priests of the Most High, but only a small section in a later evolution achieved this in a minor way. The Aryans were magi and colonizers. The archetypes are original patterns or models of a divine idea. Such archetypal or archetypical patterns are manifested in various ways. 1. Through the divine or superhuman instructors of certain races or nations on whose lives are based the dramatized rituals and the initiations of the various mysteries. 2. Through non-human forms belonging to pre-terrestrial and pre-human types of development, such as A. The signs of the zodiac in their actual, not anthropomorphized form. B. Macrocosmic symbols related to the microcosm and based upon the essential forces of the universe, such as geometric and phallic ideographs of primary importance. These have passed into the human mind and emerge in dream symbolism, but they are older than the human mind. The traditional names of great archetypal figures are often racial memories of the instructors and belong to the different phases of evolution passed through by their groups. They originated with some shadowy teacher who had in ancient times guided some particular group. They should not be confused with the archetypal force of a Manu who worked upon the collective main family of the whole race, of which the group was a part. For example, Rama was the great leader of the Aryan race, but Orpheus, Osiris, Isis, Odin, Merlin, etc. were instructors of certain Aryan groups, and ancestral memories of them passed into some of the gods and heroes of those groups. For, though some of the gods are natural forces, others are memories of prehistoric teachers. Racial angels are high beings of the archangelic or angelic hierarchy, appointed since the beginning of the world as guardians of certain groups. They might be described as personalized principles of archetypal fire, who worked first with the Manus, and then, on the withdrawal of the latter, continued in contact with the world as guardians of these principles and of the forces surrounding their earthing, or establishing in Malkuth. Such a being is referred to in the biblical phrase, the Prince of the Powers of Persia, a great racial angel of a former period. Racial angels guide races to the territory where they shall take root, and as long as a nation remains sufficiently strong, in many senses of that word, the angel is as its higher self, so to speak. When that nation decays to such an extent that real contact with the angel is not possible, the angel withdraws to a nation more capable of expressing the inner principle he represents. Such angels will incorporate in their realm lesser tribal beings of other nations, which become deeply integrated, by conquest or otherwise, with the original territory. The subject is very complex, but will repay study. Conquest on the physical plane does not always triumph over a nation. Anima and animus. These psychological terms are well defined in textbooks, and reference should be made to such books. Such reference is especially needed for psychological expressions, many of which are already used widely and inaccurately. All that need be said here is that Jung should be read with great attention, since it is probable he knew more than he cared to express plainly. When integration with the higher self draws near, it is possible that anima or animus may give place to ideal figures of the same sex as the personality, and such figures may even be foreshadowed at a much earlier stage in sensitive people in the higher emotional states. The shadow, the dweller on the threshold. The shadow of the Jungian psychology should not be confused with the dweller on the threshold. The shadow represents the subconscious material of the present incarnation, of one life only, though naturally it is affected by previous lives. The facing of the shadow implies the realization of the reality of the subconscious mind and the acceptance of material often at variance with that of the conscious mind. It occurs, therefore, at a comparatively early stage in the integration process, corresponding on the tree of life to the 32nd path, the well, and to Yesod. The dweller on the threshold, as used in our terminology, represents the entire past of the individual, all that has gone to make him what he is. It is, therefore, the aggregate of all his shadows. The facing of the dweller on the threshold is the confrontation with the entire past and calls for the full acceptance of that past and all that has gone to make the individual what he is now. It occurs at a late stage in the integration process. On the tree of life, it would correspond with a Chasidic initiation whose realizations are completed in Da'ath, where past becomes present. The full implication of the dweller on the threshold is probably not explicitly set out in psychological writings. It should be noted that the integration here referred to is not the minor one, so to speak, of the Tiferet, but a much more complete one, which is now fully treated of in published material, as far as we know. The dweller on the threshold may be seen in vision by those who have such experiences and should not be mistaken for an angelic or elemental figure of the usual type. It is a manifestation of the aggregate debt in a personalized form, or may arise from an awareness of that debt, the forms varying in accordance with the nature of the debt. This vision or awareness must be encountered before the really deep integration and more advanced spiritual progress can be made. It is possible that it will absorb the unregenerate side of the personality, the renegade image or aspect, and something approaching this modern teaching was depicted by the Egyptians in their figure of the Eater of Hearts. Terrible as can be the dweller on the threshold to confront, it is yet only an averse aspect of the higher self, potentially or unabsorbed, and can have something divine in its appearance, for it is connected with the suffering of the higher self, which becomes sin to redeem its projections, a consideration which merits deep meditation. In short, the dweller on the threshold is the sum effect of the individual's past lives, his own averse character rising out of him into seemingly independent life. The Masters. Further to previous reference. Just as at certain periods, the esoteric work and position of individuals in incarnation are assessed, so is the work of the hierarchy assessed in its relation to the greater whole. It should be clearly understood that a master is one whose function relates to the solar logoidal evolution, and the masters should be realized for what they are, and their type of functional power understood. In order to function fully in the solar logoidal evolution, much cosmic growth has to be made. The stellar initiations in all their gradations must be completed. Racial symbols, animal, the race soul exudes an influence based on an aspect of its character, and this influence can assume an etheric form. It is kind of a totem. As the race develops, this becomes one of its special symbols. The symbol of Britain, in this respect, originally of both Celts and Saxons, is a white horse. The lion, as a symbol, is not so early in origin, nor so important, being of Norman and heraldic derivation. The white horse is a very ancient symbol, and if considered as a development of the Eohippus, has contact with Atlantis, no special posture, such as rampant, etc., is prescribed. Archetypal forms and psychology. See also above. It is possible, for convenience and use, to divide types of archetypal forms into 1. The macrocosmic archetypes, such as the gods, which are personalizations of great macrocosmic forces. 2. The microcosmic archetypes dealt with in modern psychology, which are personalizations of the macrocosm in the soul of man. The microcosmic archetypes, such as the father, mother, magician, wise woman, etc., represent the linking of the developing soul with certain lines of force in the macrocosm, or, in other words, the bringing of the manhood to God or the gods. In this way, behind the masters is the supernal force that may be described as the great sacrifice, and which is linked with the sacrificed God of the Tree of Life. In addition to the archetypes here mentioned, there exist what might be called complementary forms of various aspects of the microcosm, such as the angel, the daemon, etc., and the distressing type of magical body ensouled with elemental essence, variously called the dweller on the threshold and the evil genius. It is possible for these to represent whole groups or families, but detailed discussion of them here would be too long and difficult for a paper like this. The psychological term of the renegade aspect, or the psyche, is applicable to them. The contrasexual image. This is a well-known psychological phenomenon. When recognized for what it truly is, it can be a special link between the personality and the higher self, being an aspect of the angel of the pillar opposite to the physical sex. That is, female for the silver pillar, male for the black pillar. These pillars refer to the composite glyph of the Tree of Life and the pillars, a Kabbalistic symbol. Notes on the Grail and kindred symbolism. Contacts and power from the inner planes are received on the physical plane either through a group or through an individual who passes on to a group his own contacts made on their behalf. The former method was the basis of the Old Testament Grail, the Ark. The latter was the basis of the New Testament Grail, the cup or chalice. Both these receptacles have become symbols, as have other forms of such receptacles, the dish, the bowl, the stone. Before these became symbols, they were facts. The Ark actually held a substance of the inner planes, which made a direct contact between God and the group. In Atlantis, the cup or bowl was the moon bowl of the old moon and the earliest stages of mankind, in which was a substance in actual contact with the supernal. These substances are mysteries, and indeed a version of what in far later days was known as the real presence, and from memories of them have been developed the sacramental rites of various creeds. The finding of the cup, which had been withdrawn from man because of his sins, is behind the Grail legend, in which the cup of the actual contact with the innermost, rather than the cup as a symbol of that contact, appeared to certain persons. There are endless possibilities in meditation on this theme, but much can be pieced together from what has already been said. We think of Melchizedek bringing back the sacramental symbol to Abraham, that his home was on Venus Lucifer, and that there is an old legend that the Grail was fashioned from an emerald fallen from Lucifer's crown. The cup, however, was the ancient Atlantean contact with God, stored within the moon bowl. It did not hold wine in the literal sense. The Lord Jesus, a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, reinstituted it, as at their own levels did such saviors as Orpheus, Mithra, etc. Behind all this is the secret history of Israel, in the background of which moves the archetypal priest of the Semitic Atlantean root race. Sundry notes on astrology. 1. The zodiac comes under the influence of the 12 cosmic rays, and the true zodiacal influence upon the human being dates not from that operating at the moment of the birth date of his present incarnation, but from the cosmic groupings in action at the time when the divine spark coming down the planes, see Cosmic Doctrine, was impressed with some special zodiacal force. This force, if truly discerned, would be apparent in the astrological positions of each incarnation. Also, it would be possible to make of the individual influences at work on the spirit a calculation somewhat analogous to that of the precession of the equinoxes at work on the sun. The subject is difficult and calls for expert and specialized knowledge. Each divine spark is respectively influenced by one of the 12 great concepts of truth, which are behind the 12 great rays. This is the real fundamental astrology, which covers an evolution. The working of the lesser zodiac during one incarnation is trivial by comparison, though its understanding can be very helpful. 2. The zodiac is not so much an imaginary belt as zones or rays of influence touching the Earth at certain seasons. It is best considered in sets of 4 constellations. The 3 modes of force, cardinal, fixed, mutable, refer to the 3 rays of life. There are 3 sets of these balanced with the 3 rays of destruction. Each zodiacal mode is aligned with one of these rays of life. The rays of life and the zodiacal signs equated with them vary with each evolution. The 4 holy creatures of the present evolution did not rank as such before this evolution, despite the influences they shed. In the next evolution, the 4 mutable signs will be holy. The signs of the zodiac are the mystical basis of the cosmos. 3. The sun's passage through the zodiac resembles the gathering of the limbs of Osiris, that is to say, the building into the individuality of the experiences gained from the various incarnations. These may be considered in one way as types of evolution on the path. Arthur's knights, the 12 apostles, and similar groupings may be thought of as allegorical figures in this way, as well as historical facts in some instances. If we regard the sun power in the horoscope as having the 4 aspects of horizon, zenith, sunset, and nadir, and is acting through not only the solar sign itself and that on the ascendant, but also through whatever sign or planet is on the cusp of the 10th, 7th, and 4th houses respectively, we find that this is reflected in the initiate's horoscope by the 4 great Egyptian aspects: Ra, Osiris, Turn, Khepra. The sun itself is a reflection of Sirius. Venus eventually is transcended in Sothis, or Sirius, the home of Isis. 4. Evolutionary changes are already beginning in the cosmic spheres. Towards the end of an evolution, covering a vast expanse of time, form itself begins to alter, as happened at the end of the Atlantean Age. At such a time, great cosmic beings take over from those previously in charge, and the outer conditions of Earth and man begin to change, largely because of rays or influences from distant stellar forces coming into operation. Higher-lower self, contacting, and martyrdom. The higher self contacts the lower self in many ways. At first, contacts are rare, and for the once born, may happen only once or twice in a lifetime, showing as an intuitive awareness before some important event. A martyr is always an initiate in some degree, even without any esoteric experience or training. In such a type, a very deep conviction may be sent down by the higher self, which must be acted on at all costs by the lower self, even if suffering and death result. The higher self is not, of course, concerned with what the lower self understands as the rights of religion or politics, but is occupied with some karmic matter to be adjusted by the lower self's death, or by some motive arising out of cosmic law quite unknown to the lower self, veiled behind some doctrine or concept. The martyr may well seal with his blood a cause of which, in the lower self, he is quite unaware. The glyph of the crucifixion, considered from 2 aspects. 1. A most important symbol is that of the world soul and its crucifixion. Our Lord concreted, or earthed, this glyph in his type of death. The world soul, however, is crucified on the cross of the elements, a cross which is continually expanding its arms through evolutionary development and, in material matters, through scientific research. The elemental cross has to reach its utmost limits of expansion in the present world and at the same time have each arm in perfect balance with the others. The macrocosmic mother of sorrows and the great teacher on either side of the world soul on the elemental cross make up this great glyph. Microcosmically, these are represented by Our Lady and St. John on either side of the cross of Calvary. Thus, the dark aspect of Binya, Amma, is a standing figure. The white aspect, Ema, is a seated figure. The hymn, Stabat Mater Dolorosa, is very significant, for it is in form and force a Binya rite, even to its threefold rhyming structure. Sorrow in the macrocosm implies realization of the great law, but in the microcosm it implies non-realization. Nevertheless, the deeper the capacity for feeling sorrow, the deeper is the realization eventually achieved. 2. The universe is a logoidal thought form, and its development is the unfolding, as it were, of a dream of God. Even as with man's dreams, the supernal dream is interpreted through a cipher of conditions, analogous with what men call symbols. The cipher of this world is best described as a figure on a cross. The Logos is aware of its creation in a summarized form, which gradually unfolds its meaning. Images such as this may be called archetypes. It does not greatly matter what name is given to the world symbol. It may be termed spirit crucified on matter, or man on the cross of the elements, and may be aligned with the historic event near Jerusalem some 2,000 years ago. Such a symbol is bound eventually to become esoterically connected with each one who achieves in this evolution. The achievement is first made through a Redeemer who brings the image to Malkuth. It is finally made by the individual in an individual sense. On each side of the world's soul stands a figure. One is of the Virgin Mother who brings forth in sorrow both degeneration and regeneration. The other is the mind of the world's soul, who watches beside it to give it courage and help, and is the symbol of the guides and masters. Christian history has taken Our Lady and St. John as the representatives of a vast cosmic glyph which existed before time. Nevertheless, these representatives, being aligned with the glyph in time, becomes themselves glyphs of the glyph. The coming of the cosmic Christ in the Aquarian Age, the return of the redeemed Merlin. Arthur and the Arthurian figures in the racial spheres refer to the time when man himself will take on the remains of his karma not dealt with by the last great Redeemer. This individual karma, be it understood the least part of the karma, must be fully realized in order that it may be abreacted. Our Lord took on himself what may be described as the mass disbalance of the whole evolution and the aspects of individual sin which were clogging the machinery of the universe. The weight of millions of years of sin was, therefore, laid on the divine scapegoat, who abreacted it in the short time we know of. This achievement shows the vast importance of realization compared with the relatively slight value of time itself. It is vitally important to understand what realization is, and that it has little connection with physical plane timing. True realization, in its myriad degrees of intensity, implies some measure of divine abreaction of karma and the rending of the veil between man and his cosmic origin. This veil was interposed in the Lemurian age by the Lemurian sin. Before this sin and the differentiation of the sexes in evolution, the human being consisted of the higher self, in touch with the divine spark. There was no personality as we know it. The first projections from the higher self as we now understand them were evolved around the ego created as a result of the Lemurian shadow. Notes on madness, Lemurian sin, etc. The Aquarian attitude towards madness will be very different from the Piscean, which has been accompanied by so much shame and embarrassment. It has been considered a terrible thing to have a member of the family in an asylum, but in the Aquarian age, far more people will be treated openly in mental hospitals, and many will go there of their own free will. Healing in the Aquarian age will be more directed to mental conflicts and troubles rather than physical disease. This is connected with the beginning of the final dissolution of the separateness of the ego and with the right understanding of the ring chaos. Madness implies a refusal to accept the reality of the ring chaos as a thrust block and the denial of the need to accept and seek change. It is a very severe visitation of the forces of the Holy Third Sephirah, or Binya, for the forces of the Dark Mother, or Amma, and of the ring chaos are one. The dissolution of the ego is the third birth and involves an esoteric, deliberate, and fully controlled going out of one's mind into the cosmic whole. Any refusal to accept the dissolution of the ego will entail mental disorder, for, at that stage, if the ego is not obedient to evolutionary law, it could become so inflated that it would burst its boundaries involuntarily and out of all conscious control. It might be said that the difference between madness and the third birth is that in madness, the ego bursts its boundaries involuntarily, and in the third birth, the ego with knowledge and dedication is consciously dissolved. There is a conscious, deliberate rending of the veil, and the adept takes up his work as an evolved man of the greater whole individual, but not separate. The Lemurian shadow was fundamentally the sin of separateness. In the beginning, it was intended that evolution should proceed by the experience of differentiation as a result of the epigenetic factors in the atoms, using the terminology of the cosmic doctrine. But the result of the Lemurian sin was the separation of the higher self from the lower vehicles and physical form, having, as one of the many bad results, the loss of memory of the higher states of consciousness. The divine spark, or logoidal consciousness, could not prevent this, as it cannot upon its own plane provide the formative aspect needed for manifestation. The physical plane manifestation, therefore, developed ego consciousness, the consciousness of a separate being. If there had been differentiation and not separation, the resulting consciousness would have been that of individualization. Much lies in the understanding and realization of the difference between what would have been the individualization consciousness and what is the ego consciousness, or separation consciousness. Man must eventually achieve individualization consciousness, in which the divine spark, higher self, and lower self will all be in harmonious function, and the consciousness of the body of Malkuth be recognized for what it really is, a cell in the body of the Earth Mother. A basic problem of the human evolution as the result of the fall is the conflict in the individual between the elemental and spiritual aspects of the one life. In its severest forms, this conflict leads to a kind of schizophrenia in which the elemental life of the person becomes quite a separate existence from the spiritual. Note: this subject is a very deep and difficult one. The language used and the ideas conveyed are, as it were, approximations. That is to say, they are intended to lead an understanding of the subject, rather than to give hard and fast definitions. These remarks apply also to the glyph of the crucifixion. Generally speaking, such teachings of the tradition are given to help the mind on to its own conclusions and realizations. Pan as a symbol. The great god Pan, in the final understanding of him, is a chokma figure in the solar logoidal system. He is a symbol that bears relation to the symbol of the serpent that holds his tail in his mouth. In the great god Pan lies the understanding both of the beginning and ending of the sex force. He represents the rousing of Kundalini, and he also represents that force used in the service of the higher magic of wisdom. Yet any figure that represents the beginning and the end conjoined is still a symbol and must eventually fade out to give place to reality. The reality of the great god Pan can be nothing less than a Pan of the solar logos. The saying, "All the gods are one god, and all the goddesses are one goddess, and there is one initiator," should be constantly worked on. The one initiator is increasing in realization as a result of the increasing integration of higher self and personality, which leads on to the empty room in death. Therefore, in varying degrees and upon different levels, all gods and goddesses represent aspects of the one god, which is both male and female. Non-human forces sometimes overshadow humans and bring in influences of other racial groups than that of those humans. The various racial groups differ in their influences, hence the different types of elementals seen in various countries. Byron is an illustration of one influenced by forces of more than one racial group. In addition, he had a demonic form of daemon overshadowing his higher self, and this daemon had no opportunity in that incarnation of manifesting, save mainly through the intellect. The revolutionary forces at work in Byron's day were able to use this dynamic daemon to some extent, but more than half remained unexpressed. Thus there is a sense of something tearing itself to pieces all the time, and having to do all it could with the utmost urgency since time was short. The poet died at the age of 36. Form. In Binya and Yesod, Binya represents concept behind the form, and its archangel represents the intelligence behind form, the formless builder of form, working behind both the dark and bright aspects. Yesod represents the etheric mesh of form. Healing and the four elements. The Aquarian age is especially concerned with air healing through the use of the human mind and certain forces of air, hence Steiner's references to the value of the mistletoe, which is an air symbol. In this age, in addition to the special air aspect, the healing values of all four elements should be re-established and the power of each be realized. In each element, there are harmful as well as healing forces. The great healers of former ages worked mainly through a certain ray of the sun and upon different levels of that ray. Our Lord used this solar ray by bringing it down through himself onto others. Other solar healers used another level of this ray and brought it into contact with the patient's higher self, whence it approached his personality. They were not, of course, able to contact it in the major degree of force used by our Lord. Archetypes. Refer also to previous notes. It must be remembered that archetypes, though possessing a certain defined aspect of force, work in phases. Thus the three great logoidal aspects, love, wisdom, power, work each in three phases. For example, the wisdom aspect works through wisdom, power, and wisdom love. In the development of an initiate, there may at times appear to be a retrogression to a type of manifestation which was thought to have been left behind, but what really happens is that during initiatory development, each path is retraced upon a higher arc. Thus, an archetypal force may again take up the work of past years, but upon a higher level. The lower curve of a new spiral of evolution corresponds with the ascending curve of the previous spiral. The watchman, or watcher on the tower, is an archetypal figure sometimes used from the inner planes to help the soul to realize its true destiny. It represents the eternal, indestructible Pan of each one, linking the higher self with the divine spark. It recognizes only reality, and therefore its actions seek to destroy all that hinders realization of a soul's destiny. The temporal part of each one is ultimately destroyed because it is unrecognized by the watchman. He is a figure of eternity, immovable, unchanging, belonging to the past, present, and future, making them one. He is a death figure, related to the abstract mind and causative planes. Horus is sometimes called the Lord of the Aquarian Age. He is a winged, complete being, containing within himself his father Osiris and his mother Isis. Isis and Osiris were one being in primeval days and later split into two. Their son represents each on the new arc, joined once more into one being. Thus Isis and Osiris represent the primal good Lemurian age, and Horus represents the completed Aquarian version of that age raised to a spiritual level, hence the wings. Earthbound souls. Earthbound souls can broadly be divided into two types. 1. the type of soul who, by reason of karmic implications, has strong contact with Earth conditions. In the phase following physical death, such a type can easily be drawn back because the Earth vibrations are stronger than the spiritual body of the soul until after the lapse of a certain amount of time in which the spiritual body can be built up for activity on the higher and more subtle planes. This is one of the reasons why angels attend at a man's death. They protect him during the phase of adjustment to the new conditions. Their vibrations help him to move into a new mansion. If the soul is drawn back, it is usually due to weakness in the ethical nature or to a swamping by the earth forces due to special evolutionary karmic factors in which it is involved, often in relation to others who still remain on the physical plane. Such souls are always helped on the inner planes by more evolved human beings, as well as by angels. 2. The strong type of soul who, to suit his own convenience, wills to remain as close as possible to Earth conditions, refusing to undergo the subjective experiences which will build up the spiritual body. This type of soul realizes that without a body, the forces will begin to disintegrate, to diffuse, and that this will mean destruction to his way of life. He therefore puts up a tremendous fight, causing what is known as haunting, and can, in order to maintain himself, use obsession of animals and creatures of lower development. It is necessary for the adept to deal with such cases, for the will of a man is involved. If a case were so severe that the will had to be broken, the result would be disintegration of the human soul. The adepti work to change the will, if at all possible. The unpleasant, frightening, and sometimes dangerous symptoms of hauntings are due to the fact that by virtue of his higher grade, this departed human being can, for a certain period of time, until the higher cosmic forces have built up a wall of pressure to prevent this, manipulate and control the vibrations of the earth or of a lower type of being. An inner plane adept is handicapped in his work on this type of condition by not having a physical form to work with or through, because the higher forces which are being brought down to build up the wall of pressure that will effectively seal the soul off from the earth contacts need to be earthed through a physical form. Otherwise, the wall, however strong, lacks roots, and the earthbound soul of a great strength will overthrow it. Also, a haunting is fed by fear. For these reasons, the adepti need in such work the strong adept on the physical plane of compassionate understanding. The adepti on the inner plane deal with the cosmic forces and the individuality of the man. The physical plane adept's cooperation is needed on the lower levels of the Earth's forces and the personality of the man involved. If properly understood, such work has a regenerative effect on all who are in any way involved. The Earth and Venus. The Earth was incarnated in the sphere of Venus at a very early phase. Consequently, there is a contact between Venus and Earth. Netzach has the rose and the lamp, two great Rosicrucian symbols, as its own. Also, it has the girdle or zone. Netzach has far more significance than the sphere of romance. Here are found three symbols used by the Rosicrucians, and here is the sphere from which the great Manu brought the three gifts to man. The zone, or girdle, holds an inner significance of the Earth's contact with Venus. The legend of the girdle of Ishtar, the last possession that the goddess was called on to surrender in the underworld during her search for Tammuz, must have had deep spiritual meaning. The Earth contacted deep spiritual awareness during her Venus phase, and from Venus, spiritual teaching came to Earth in her present phase, through the Manu Melchizedek. Among the three netzach symbols in the mystical Kabbalah, and those three gifts of the Manu, there is an inner alignment of meaning, though not of form. The lamp is thus aligned with asbestos, for only when a man can withstand spiritual fire and water may he hold that lamp in his hand. This is the sphere that contains the lamp which holds and shows forth the flame. The flame is drawn from Chokmah and fanned by Geburah, but shown to the earth by Netzach. Netzach is, in one tradition, the source of the Grail, the emerald which fell from Lucifer's crown as he came to earth. Astrology. 1. It is said that the first formative forces streamed upon the earth from the eye of the constellation of Taurus, associated with Aldebaran. 2. In the earliest Lemurian days, certain adepti came to Earth from the planet Jupiter, which contains a secret scheme connected with the Earth. Racial forces. In this age, all racial forces are undergoing changes. Racial angels themselves are being influenced from more remote spheres by other cosmic beings. When a man reincarnates, the race to which he is sent is by no means a matter of chance, for the different lessons necessary and the different karmic details to be worked out cannot always be found in the race to which there may be a natural gravitation from past lives. In this fact, we may find an understanding of the traitor, the aggressive pacifist, and such figures who have had, probably in the first incarnation, links with a race which at that time were legitimate, but now may be out of place. The unevolved man is always swayed to some extent by his former racial angel. The more evolved man realizes that his duty is to his present racial angel, but his past life may enable him to handle enemy force in wartime with special skill. Races nowadays are less defined through blood. They tend to be in categories of language, blood being more and more mixed. The influences of the territory upon which a race was first settled continue as a subconscious element. However, or to put it differently, people of the same language fall heir to the forces of the land in which the language matured. The blood bond represents the element of fire, to which indeed racial angels also belong. The language bond represents the element of air. There is much to be learnt of this in the study of the occultism of speech. As time proceeds, we shall tend to draw back to one root race, and Europe is now tending towards this, and Britain is included. The Russian race tends to the east, and to join up once more with the Mongolian powers via Siberia. Behind these Mongolian powers are remote forces for good, working from Tibet very gradually upon Russia. The symbolic formula of race and language is the Tower of Babel. This tower was built out of time, and therefore had to be destroyed. It should now be built up, for now we tend rightfully to reach to the skies and to have one language. Vanity. Apart from its more easily recognizable manifestations, vanity can be the result of a form of hate and distaste for the personality by an adverse aspect of a higher self. In such a case, the personality of early days will probably be found to have been spurred by that averse aspect, and the instrument provided for incarnation refused or its experiences rejected. A kind of hate can be directed all the time by what seems to be the inner levels of personality against the personality itself, resulting in a slow and insidious form of suicide. Flattery or even comfort offered by others are not acceptable to this type of vanity, which can consider only its own perverted reflection. Thus, the perverted opinions of the false image or aspect biases all matters concerning that self. Self-love and self-hate are two sides of the same coin. Racial angels. See also above. These angels are evolving somewhat like the higher selves of human beings and have to move on to other stages of development, which in their case means working behind a different race. As with men, the racial angel's main force may focus out of true alignment with its source, and then very often an evil power will use the racial angel's force, even as an evil personality will utilize the force of its higher self in wrong ways. The racial angels may be compared to some extent with the guardian angel connected with the individual. These latter are embodiments of the logoidal will, split off into an entity attached to each human unit when spiritual differentiation took place. The racial angels are entities holding one of the special aspects of the Manu who first guided the main branch of the race. Thus, the Aryan leader Rama has left aspects of his power in the various Aryan races. The racial angels, when properly evolved, earn a seat at the sidereal round table. Every now and again, some political measure is introduced which marks this concept. Again and again, also, it is found that the seat will not be taken until after a long time, even as a man cannot sit at the round table until he is king of himself. Angels of large and backward races are not at the same stage as angels of the relatively developed nations. There is a lack of cohesion in such racial vehicles, which are normally not welded properly with the group mind. In such conditions, a strong and scheming party may interpolate a false angel, and this false angel takes the place of the true racial guardian, which was not strongly linked up to the group. Where several races are amalgamated into one, the several racial angels are in one aura, and this aura may be regarded as one vast oversoul. In this way, the various feline groups are included in the oversoul or aura of the arch lion, and the earth and the present moon are parts of one oversoul or aura. Uriel and Sandalphon. Uriel is the regent of the element of earth. Sandalphon is the sphere of earth, or Malkuth, and they have an interlinked relationship, each being regent of a densest aspect of force. Sandalphon rules over the structure of the life forms within this planet. Thus he rules over the evolution of consciousness and of form upon the earth, and so is ruler of the souls of fire, which is a symbolic name for the consciousness of the atoms. Uriel rules over the basic forces of the Earth itself, particularly the seismic powers, and was connected with this planet before man inhabited it. He has guided Earth's evolution before its form solidified when it was passing through its fiery and watery stages. He is said to have foretold the Atlantean cataclysms and to have been the teacher of Enoch. Uriel brought the Great Deluge, or at least administered it to the Earth as a server of greater powers. Through his agency, fire, water, and air are esoterically permitted to work upon Earth. At one time, Uriel was a regent of the Old Moon, and some of his power relates, therefore, to the inner Earth. The inner Earth potencies relate to the Old Moon, the moon which preceded the present planet, and to pre-Atlantean days when the human consciousness was somewhat of the nature of the Absolute of Yesod. The inner Earth is connected with a certain type of physical healing because it contains the first manifestation of the four elements and the primary components of the human body. Raphael and Michael are each at times ascribed to the sun. Raphael represents the basic forces of the sun as he stands within the sun. Michael represents the solar forces in their aspect of spiritual power. Thus he directs one aspect of the power behind the solar hero, whether god or demigod or human, and representing the supernal fire, is in charge of the guarding of the approaches to consciousness from the infernal fire. He is ruler over the holy Bani Elohim. An unholy section of these Bani Elohim helped in the black magic of Atlantis. Endurance. The esoteric concept of endurance as a virtue is not in any way a form of the slave mentality. It is the force of the rocks which cannot be moved and full awareness of that force. Saturn, and a note on animals. The Saturn evolution of humanity was the golden age for Saturn, was the first sun of our humanity, not the sun behind the sun, but simply the first sun. Matter was then withdrawn from that planet and used on other planes, and Saturn became the planet of death and constriction. The higher arcs of the Dark Mother deal with the breaking down and building up of the debris of the universe, such as chaos. That was Eden, or the Golden Age, and its symbolism holds much interest. Saturn was connected with both solar and lunar developments of very remote ages. Its magical metal is lead. To transmute this base metal into gold is a well-known symbolical alchemical operation. The depth of this symbolism lies in the fact that the lead must be turned back into gold. There is a mention in the cosmic doctrine of the star Alpha Centauri, and the star Gamma of that constellation was that first contacted by the logoidal mind when contemplating the beginning of human evolution in form. The higher animals are developments of logoidal experiments, which might have been human had not their oversouls failed in certain points. The four highest types, however, have much part in the design of man, the four holy living creatures. Nevertheless, it was in the centaur sphere that something of the true design was reached. Hence, the centaur is a constellation of great import, and the astrological equivalent, if strong in a horoscope, may indicate a special aptitude for the understanding of humanity. It is easy to see also how the deeply debased use of knowledge of these matters was a kind of evil inspiration to the Lemurian sinners. Archetypes. See also above. The coalescing with a cosmic archetype is a very significant act. It means that a spiritual concept received from the logoidal mind becomes an actuality in Malkuth because it is lived out. This concept is first given to humanity in the form of a myth, and a myth may be likened to a dream of the logoidal unconscious, which then becomes translated to a projection of human consciousness. Work on an archetype helps a soul, group, or nation to redeem and assimilate an aspect of itself which had previously either been rejected or projected. Therefore, there are many kinds of archetypes, some dealing with the personality specifically, some with the individuality, as well as the universal and logoidal archetypes, which can be applied to groups and nations. It is all part of the process of integration. Pendragon. Arthur's symbol of the dragon refers to Lemuria, when the constellation Draco held the bull star. It becomes also either the winged serpent of the higher wisdom or the evil serpent. Death, change, reincarnation, etc. The system of change, which later became death, was at first stages of withdrawal from the earth plane. Corruption of the physical vehicle had not as yet become stereotyped. The physical vehicle itself was hardly physical in the sense in which we now use the word. It was a densifying etheric vehicle which could be cast off somewhat like a complete skin, which another human being could then use while the former occupant returned to phases of inner life, till he once more contacted in realization his own origins on entry into the solar logoidal system, passing once more in reverse back up the path of human evolution as it then was. Such a journey, to which the incarnationary being brought its own experience and added its own quota of development, was much simpler and shorter than it is now, for we are speaking of the beginnings of human history. Now the process is a long and intricate one, for after the ending by physical death of a period of development on Earth, the spirit of man passes on a long journey of inter-incarnationary processes in which the evolutionary phases of the higher self are recapitulated again through the previous chains of its development before humanity lived in the present Earth. This goes on at the same time that the personality and higher vehicles recapitulate and absorb in meditation the experiences of the incarnation just ended. All progress follows the law of recapitulation, which involves the great laws of change, transmutation, and sacrifice. Physical recapitulation can be observed in the early stages of the human embryo. In the Aquarian age, Yesod is much concerned with redemption and equilibrium. Note on the inner vehicles of man. In the heroic age, and even in later days among the Greek philosophers, the mind did not work in quite the same way as it does today. In the heroic age, the concrete mind was certainly in use and developing, but not nearly so developed as it became later. It followed that the great archetypes and the principles behind them worked through the etheric body in a manner not possible nowadays. Hence, in tales of those days, there can be discerned a macrocosmic grandeur in the microcosm. The concrete mind played a relatively smaller part in the makeup of man, but the abstract mind was normally in touch with the thinker of the day. At present, the reverse is the case, for the abstract mind has receded in the uninitiated generally, and it is the destiny of modern man to work as much as may be through his concrete mind. Thus, everything today is necessarily seen in a different perspective. Great heroism indeed does exist today, but does not reflect itself, so to speak, directly upon the etheric from macrocosmic levels. To the modern mind, for example, the dragging of the body of Hector by Achilles, after the latter had slain him, seems cruel and dreadful, but it is probable that even the Trojans did not take that view at the time. It was gigantic revenge on the grand scale of Hector and Achilles, a revenge in which the oversouls of both Greeks and Trojans took part. Thus is drama born, or in mystery language, thus are rituals built and worked. The Masters. See also above. In the East, especially in India, the conditions and atmospheres are much easier to manipulate from the inner planes for purposes of manifestation. Such manifestations are of the etheric or subtle aspects of matter, and being of matter can be termed physical, but that word has then a meaning somewhat different from what is usually understood by it. When the Theosophical Society was inaugurated, the strongest possible manifestations of the inner plane adepti were needed to impress the teaching, but when that had been achieved, the same strength of manifestation was no longer called for. Concerning the incarnations of inner plane adepti, the question is more complex than usually thought, and there are differences between the degrees of incarnation. A suitable disciple of a certain master can be used by that master, with the consent and cooperation of the higher self of that disciple, for a type of incarnation, and the result would differ little from a genuine incarnation for as long as the master's purpose required. The incarnating force, however, would be so incarnated only temporarily and intermittently that the personality thus manifesting it would not be its own true projection. An example of this on the very highest level is said to be the manifestation during 3 years of an aspect of the Christ in the Lord Jesus in order to accomplish a great work, the high initiate who manifested the force having had other lives on earth directed by his own spirit. The Archangel Sandalphon. This archangel is the guide of the planet Earth, the regent of Malkuth. See Cosmic Doctrine. He has guided the Earth since Lemurian days, and many of his relations with Earth figure in mythologies and the myths of certain gods. His development affects humanity somewhat as the evolution of humanity affects the development of the Earth, the planetary spirit as described in the Cosmic Doctrine. The racial angels are in his especial jurisdiction, and certain countries and their influences are in a deep sense the result of his own stages of growth. Pallas Athene. Wisdom is virgin and unadulterated. To some extent it is veiled, for the world could not survive the sight of it naked. The deeper into matter it penetrates, the more it must be shielded, and therefore it is armed for its own protection. It wears a helmet in order that its own fire shall not destroy the brain. It is begotten, not made. It is born of the Father, such as the divine spark through logoidal contact. It bears the spear and holds all knowledge. In short, it is Pallas Athene, and on her shield is the Gorgon's head, veiled or unveiled.